firstly, just want to say good afternoon and thank you so much for joining us for the webcast today. This is an exclusive webcast for our alumni community, so thank you for taking the time out to be part of it. We are going to be running today a masterclass on CV writing and interviewing, and we're obviously delighted to be joined by our wonderful search and intelligence and recruitment team here at EY. So we're keen to offer this session. We know how unsettling the market is at the moment. I was at an event yesterday who said there's currently 16 million people on the move in the job market in the UK or considering a move. So we wanted to share with you kind of some of the team's tips on how to prep your CV, how to do some interviewing should you be thinking of a move yourself. So first things first, in terms of housekeeping, this is obviously being hosted on Zoom. You do have the option to ask the panel questions, so please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And please do feel free to chip in with any comments in the chat as well. The Q&A box, please do keep that just for questions for the panel that you would like us to answer live. And we will try and get through as many of those questions as we can on the session today. Very helpfully, a number of you submitted questions in advance of today's session, which is great. So we have compiled them and we'll start off with some of those questions initially, and then we'll start answering some of your live questions as well. Any issues at all, just pop us a note in the chat. So my name's Jen Parker. I'm the candidate engagement lead here for the UK and I for EY. I joined the business just last year and I'm responsible for looking after all of our online communities of talent. And I'm joined today by Raz, Viv and Lottie, who are going to give you some of their top tips on how to navigate the current landscape within recruitment. So I'll let you all introduce yourselves. Viv, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Gemma. So hi, everyone. My name is Vivian Yor. I am a senior associate within the talent search and insights team, focusing primarily on executive search recruitment, so very much focused on the headhunting for senior staff. I've got a background going back to about 7 years ago, starting within the legal market. I've since then also branched over to the tax market as well, and have recently joined EY to help out with the senior recruitment. So that is a quick intro of myself.
I'll go next. Hello, everybody. Lovely to have you all here. I'm Raz. I joined EY last year in May, actually, so just been over a year now. I've been here and I recruit into the strategy and transaction service line, focusing more on the financial services side of the business. And I've kind of been in recruitment for about 8 years now, and I've worked in a variety of different industries. So this is the first time that I've worked in kind of in the FS side of the world. So yeah, really exciting.
Excellent. So my name is Lottie and I'm one of the experienced hire recruiters as well. And I work in the core business services part of the business and resource management, and EY is based within that. And I rejoined actually EY last year. So I'm a very proud boomerang. So I used to work for EY before, and I previously also looked after recruitment for strategy and transactions and assurance. So I've got quite a wide range of skills within EY.
Thank you so much, ladies, for introducing yourselves. So I think we'll get stuck in with the questions that have come in from in advance from our attendees. I think obviously we don't want to use the word COVID because I think everyone is a bit tired of hearing it, but essentially we have been through a really difficult couple of years through the pandemic. And someone's asked how we've seen the recruitment process change since the beginning of COVID, and how have we kind of adjusted to a virtual world. So Raz, I think I'll come to you first and see what you think about this one. Oh, you're on mute, Raz, sorry.
Apologies. Yes, no, really good question. And for me, I was actually looking for a role myself. As I mentioned, I joined EY May last year. So I think at that time we were kind of coming out of lockdown and obviously recruitment's up and running. So from my experience, you know, I felt that the hiring process itself actually had sped up quite a lot, because normally you would have to be invited in to go in for an interview, but actually whilst I was going through the interview process, particularly with EY and other businesses, it was all happening quite rapidly. So in a way it was quite a positive, I think, just in terms of trying to secure something but also having as many conversations at the same time, and then being able to kind of decide, you know, what was the right role for me to take.
I completely echo that as well. On a sort of more of a senior headhunting approaches as well. Normally dealing with partners on a day-to-day basis, it's normally very hard to sort of catch them face to face. So it's definitely sped up the process a lot more. I think some people are still missing the sort of face-to-face interactions. So now that COVID is coming to a bit of an end, we are starting to see some reintroductions again of face-to-face and coffee meetings. But yeah, echo your words entirely, Raz. It's become a lot easier, a lot more, an easier flow overall. So yeah, that's my bit on that.
Also, the other thing that has happened is that we've become even more in terms of like remote working has become so much more popular, obviously. And then some of the roles might be still a bit more remote, but now there's more to like hybrid approach as well. But we have quite a lot of our teams might not be, it's not so location specific anymore. So we have been hiring people, and in terms of interviewing as well. So we might have somebody interviewing a candidate who might be based in Scotland and somebody who might be based in Bristol, and they can do sort of like the recruitment process easy because all the calls can be done obviously on Teams. So that's been great. And obviously that's kind of reflected on what we do. So we have all these offers as well that you don't, like for example, I myself used to be based in London, but now I'm based in Leeds, but I'm effectively doing a London job. However, so like working remotely in Leeds. So there's been great sort of like increase in flexibility.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Viv and I were at the event yesterday, and I think there's a lot of talk of some organisations going back to, really asking people to be in the office on a really frequent basis. And obviously we were kind of explaining that that's not really how we work, and we still kind of support a fully hybrid model. But I think for a lot of people, work-life balance is so much more of a factor since the pandemic. So it is something that remains very high on the agenda for a lot of people that we're speaking to who are making the move. Thank you very much for that. The next question that we came in, I think a lot of people will have heard the term the Great Resignation. So we've got really high levels of attrition across a number of organisations, and certainly the recruitment market is very competitive. And someone said, how can you make your CV stand out and really resonate with people who are reviewing it? So what do you think, would make someone kind of stand out? Raz, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I can. So there are actually lots of different things that you can do. I'm just kind of thinking back to when I first created my own CV. I won't go into years, but just looking at that and thinking how far we've come in terms of how CVs are presented. And to this day, as a recruiter, what I really look for and what actually helps me wade through, hundreds and thousands of CVs that we get is it being relevant. So a top tip I would say is just to ensure that your most relevant experience is, at the top. And if it's a particular qualification that this role is asking for, make sure you highlight that. Another thing I would say is also putting in kind of core skills, maybe at the top of your CV, or again highlighting that in your CV, so that it's easy for the recruiter to kind of see whether you've got these certain skills, or if it's a type of system or program that you're using, because there's obviously lots of information to read off of a CV, and we want to see what's most relevant. Another thing I want to mention is a cover letter. And I know, again, that could be quite, an old school thing to do, attach a cover letter. But actually, particularly for more technical roles, it can be really beneficial having that cover letter in there, especially if you've got, a lot of work experience. For example, a CV that's more than 1 or 2 pages. A cover letter can really help a recruiter and also the hiring manager just to get in a nutshell exactly what you do, what you're looking for, and also just to get to know you a little bit better on paper, so that when we get to that first stage interview, there's already that introduction there.
And I think, Viv, you kind of support the kind of executive search and the senior hiring. What's kind of your perspective on that from someone at that more senior level?
Yeah, so I think what Raz is mentioning, obviously highlighting those skill sets. So I always used to still do recommend to everyone to put in transferable skill sets. So to really be able to make your CV stand out on those actual transferable skill sets that you have got. So which is something I always sort of say, a recruiter looks at your CV and they try to look at keywords. What is important? What do I need to find? So make sure that the job description that you are, or the job that you're applying for, and the job description that you've got, make sure that you try and highlight as much transferable skill sets as possible. Obviously, Raz already mentioned it, but I think that is something that a lot of people sometimes forget about, because they go into those details role per role, which is obviously fantastic, but it's, we need to have something that grabs someone's attention immediately. And I think the same thing with the cover letters as well. I think cover letters are great, but again, that CV is the first thing we look at. That needs to stand out. The first page, in my opinion, should be the one that sort of almost screams at you to say, please, like, this is the right candidate and this is the right people that we're looking for. And that's something really, really important. On the more senior side as well, I think we often looking a little bit more of the softer skill sets as well. So perhaps how have you managed teams before? What have your success factors been in that? And the more senior you go, the more likely there are sort of case studies as well, and trying to explain to the business of what businesses you've won in the past, what you have been able to deliver in the past. And again, that's where I suppose a softer skill set might come in handy, to be able to highlight what you've been able to deliver, what issues you might have had faced in the past with staff members, and how you've dealt with that, and the success stories overall. Yeah, that's probably my piece of advice on that. And again, don't make CVs too long, because it's unlikely for a recruiter to go through every single page and every single word. So that those first 2 pages are the most important ones to stand out, really.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, that's another question that came in, because we do have this kind of, and I know we've discussed it all internally before. I'm very much like, write your CV as long as you like it. It doesn't really bother me, but I know that we've spoken about, a lot of people feel that 1 to 2 pages max is how long your CV should be. I kind of say that the bottom 2/3 of the first page are the most important, because that's really where people's eyes are kind of focused to. But I know certainly we've had a discussion about this, so I don't kind of know who wants to take on that point around you kind of like on the side of having a shorter CV, rather than me, who's like, just write it as long as you like.
I tend to always say that 2 is ideal, but obviously 3 is sort of like max, but obviously it depends, and it can depend really on the role as well. But I would say sort of like 2 is like what kind of like really kind of like it would be ideal in my opinion. But I think, like others were saying, that it's more about sort of like making your CV count, and because recruiters read high volumes to make sure that it kind of stand out. Another thing I would also mention is that it's quite good, for example, if you have any gaps in your CV, that's totally okay. I've had 2 career breaks. As a recruiter, if you had career breaks, and for example with COVID, people were being made redundant, that's absolutely fine. So it's actually, in my opinion, it's good to maybe explain those in the CV as well. As I say, I had 2 career breaks and it was never an issue. And just very briefly, obviously CVs are fantastic, and just covering this very quickly, but obviously maybe treat your LinkedIn profile as an CV as well, but particularly for our talent search team. So maybe update your LinkedIn profile a little bit to make it look like a CV. So those would be my sort of top tips on this.
Absolutely. And also to highlight on those, on that, Lottie, what I've done in the past is if I wasn't 100% sure if the candidate was going to be suitable or not, and sort of trying to analyze the CV a bit more, I actually ended up going onto their LinkedIn, and I saw the recommendations that this candidate had received. And that's really what made it stand out to me. And I immediately, reached out to the candidate, and we actually ended up placing that candidate internally. So again, those can really be success stories. So do ask for those recommendations. Do make sure that your LinkedIn stands out as well, because if somebody sort of looks at your CV a little bit doubtful, but then goes, let me have a quick look on their LinkedIn, and that really stands out, it can really make a difference.
100%. And we've had a question come in from Colette, who said, definitely understand the suggestion of a short CV, but what if you're someone who has 20 years experience? How far do you go back? Do you go back all the way, or do you summarize some of your positions? I guess my first thought is, maybe do you just put in key achievements from those roles rather than like the day-to-day, because obviously it was quite a number of years ago. I don't know what the panel thinks about that.
Shall I take that question? Is that all right? I think I always say it's the last sort of 5 years that are most important in my humble opinion. But at the same time, if you've done something 10 years ago that is really, really stands out, mention it. But maybe what I used to or still advise people is the last 5 years of your CV should be slightly more detailed and elaborating your experience. Anything below that, you almost want to bullet point it, where you're actually shortening your CV quite a bit. So you're not leaving anything of your experience out of it, especially if it's transferable skill set, but just give an overall view of what you've done. So for instance, during this role, I was in charge of delivering this model across to following a couple of businesses within financial services, whatever it might be, and then maybe highlight your key achievement there. But again, if it's not relatable to the role, you don't have to bullet point. You can just give an overall view of what you did, and that can literally be one sentence. But the last 5 years are often the most important bit, unless you're obviously changing careers again, then it might be slightly different. But that's sort of my opinion on that, because it is hard to summarize your whole career, and I really do appreciate that. But the bullet points often help. Again, make sure that you're highlighting those transferable skill sets.
I'll just add as well, I think with the transferable skills that Vivian's mentioned, if you've worked for some incredible businesses, for example, and you want to showcase that, again, just pop that in, maybe, the top part of your CV, if you do like a little blurb about yourself. In that way, the recruiter and the hiring manager can see some relevant businesses that you've worked for, or again, bullet point it down below to say, you worked at here, and you can put the dates that you've worked. And if the interviewer wants to understand a bit more about that, then you can explore that in the interview. So yeah, don't feel like you have to take it off for the sake of it being, a CV that's too long, because again, if you've worked for incredible businesses and you've got great skill set, then definitely you want to scream and shout about that. That is what we want to understand more about, and the opportunity is given to talk about that in the interview or when you have like an initial screening call with the recruiter.
Definitely. And Lottie, you talked about kind of career breaks. Becky's asked about if you've had a short stint at a company, like how, maybe this is more in the kind of interviewing stakes, but even if you had an interview or initial call with a recruiter, if someone says, why did you only stay for a short period of time, I'm very much of the opinion that sometimes people make wrong moves and actually it just wasn't right for them. But I'm guessing honesty is the best policy here, but do you have any kind of advice around how people might handle that if someone asks them why they've only been at a company for a short space of time?
Yeah, well, I've actually had recent discussions with candidates about this, because obviously sometimes people might be doing contracting roles, so then they might have lots of short roles, and I think it's actually quite good to put in there that I was contracting, because when we're reviewing CVs, we might be thinking that they've been jumping from one role to another. But if there's a short stint, let's say recently, just be honest with your recruiter. I'm currently having a discussion with the candidate, and they told me that they feel that they slightly missold the opportunity, and that's totally fine, because that can happen. Obviously, if you're unhappy in your role, that's kind of fine. But maybe sort of like, again, like putting it in a cover letter or something. You don't have to start going into detail or interviews, sort of like to start going exactly what's been going, but it's okay to say that actually I took on this role and for these and these reasons it's not really aligned to my career ambitions. So we do see that, and particularly at the moment there's so many roles open, so I feel that people are maybe applying for these roles, and for whatever reason, if it doesn't work out, but I'd always go for the sort of honesty and having that sort of dialogue about it. But otherwise, if you have lots of short stints, I would kind of explain that maybe there's sort of like some reason for that. Like again, there were redundancies because of COVID and whatnot, and you might have had some contract work. So it's good to sort of like just put a little bit of explanation so that we can understand the bigger picture.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's lots of candidates obviously being reviewed for the same job, but lots of applications are coming in, so it's just about kind of making it as relevant as possible. Dev, were you going to chip in there as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I've had candidates before that were at a competitor for maybe just short of a year, which the more senior you go, the shorter the stints, the more sometimes there is a bit of a can we trust this person, can we not trust this person? But I think what this candidate actually ended up doing was highlighting on their CV, I was actually headhunted out of this role. Once I was at the role, I actually noticed that it wasn't exactly what I was sold, and therefore am now currently looking. So first of all, they highlighted that they're headhunted. Candidates that are headhunted are often very strong candidates as well. But again, it was missold the role, and it just wasn't the right opportunity, and it wasn't what they expected, because it might have been budget, it might have been change of leadership. I don't know what it could have been, but just again, I 100%, basically, Lottie, what I wanted to do, I wanted to echo your words and fully agree with what you said. Honesty is the best policy. Just be honest with people. And, you know, we all have been in circumstances where we're in a role and you're like, well, this is not what I expected from this role at all. And if you want to discuss it in further detail, you can also just say, happy to discuss this in further detail, if you don't want to put something on paper, for instance. So yeah, just to echo your words again. Sorry, James, you're on mute.
I clicked the button, but it didn't actually unmute. I was just going to say, in terms of, we've had another question come in. So someone said, you know, as an experienced hire, I've had to start looking at a website as they want to move into being recognised as a thought leader. I think that I'm going to just chip in here in terms of my kind of thoughts on this. I think it depends on the kind of work that you do. I think you can have a website. I've seen candidates in the past who have had websites and they've been very relevant to what they do. For example, facility is a huge growth area at the moment. There's a lot of people who see this as a real vocation. They've written papers on it. They've got a lot of experience to be able to demonstrate and show kind of value in that space. I think it's quite a big investment, not necessarily financially, but I think time-wise, creating a website can be quite a big investment. So while I would say if it's something that you feel you want to do, then by all means do it. Will it be something that someone at that first review stage will necessarily go into in a lot of detail? I don't know. I think it'd probably be more likely maybe at the first stage interview that someone would probably go in and have a look and maybe, you know, prepare some questions around that. It may be something that you want to reference when you're talking to someone to say that you do have it, but I wouldn't say it's particularly common. I certainly don't see it on a lot of CVs anymore. I don't know about anyone else if that's something that they see a lot of.
Not really, no. I mean, I'll be honest, outside of EY, where I've worked for retailers, you would see candidates put their website, but that's because they're graphic designers or art workers, and that's very relevant. So my opinion would be, like you're saying, Gemma, like it probably isn't worth investing so much time into that if you're doing it just to be seen. Stick to, you know, traditional CV and really focus on perfecting that. If you feel it's relevant to have a website, if you're showcasing something in particular that's maybe a bit more creative, or you know, if it's something that, you know, there's analytical data perhaps you want to showcase, then yes, do that. But it probably isn't the first thing that we would click. Again, we're just thinking realistically about time, and just, you know, what we are really interested in finding out about a candidate at that first stage when we're screening CVs is skill set and experience, and you can see that.
Yeah, LinkedIn's a really good platform. So if you don't want to produce a website, you could produce an article on LinkedIn. You could put the links in your CV to the articles that you've written. So if you want to be seen as a thought leader, then by publishing things that are public, people can see the response, they can comment on it. It's much easier to get feedback on a platform like that rather than on a website where you don't really know, other than using analytics and the kind of back end, how well that website's performing. So I would say that's maybe a better starting point, just to kind of share your thoughts on a more kind of public platform.
I also think it's depending as to whether you might be a contractor or not. I think some contractors that have got their own limited companies, it can sometimes be quite beneficial to them, again, because they're working for multiple companies at once, basically. So I have seen, when I used to work in the contracting world, that was quite, and that's something that the hiring managers quite enjoyed. But again, I agree with what everyone is saying. You need to make sure that it's going to be relevant to the actual job. So again, if you're a graphic designer, absolutely. And if you are delivering certain services as a limited company, and you're contracting at different clients, so to say, then absolutely it can be useful, but it's not something that we necessarily seek to find, so to say.
Yeah, no, definitely, that makes sense. So I think we've had a couple of questions come in around the kind of interview. So one of the questions that we'd had in advance was, you know, you've written your CV, you've got past the first stage, you're going to get invited to interview. What's your kind of top tips for recommending, kind of someone prepare for an interview? How much time should someone take? What should they do in order to kind of get a grip with kind of what they're going to be doing in the interview process?
I'll kick that off, Gemma. So yeah, I think there's lots of different things that you can do. Some of the basic things I would say is a must is go and research the team that you're going to work for. This is something that will be beneficial for you to understand more about the team, who works there, the types of experience that they'll be in the team, but also just it shows that you're interested in understanding more about the wider the team, and not just kind of the job in itself, because that's a huge factor as well in that role. So yeah, go on to LinkedIn, find out who the managers are, connect with them, maybe not reach out to people, go for that first meeting with the interviewer, but definitely put in some time to learn a little bit more about the team, and look at their social pages as well. A lot of businesses do have social pages on Facebook, Instagram, but also LinkedIn, where you can learn a little bit more about their culture, and obviously if culture is a big one for you, then that sometimes can shine through by just looking at some of the posts that the business are making, and also just how employees are interacting with that as well. So I would say LinkedIn is a great one to use when trying to find out information about the team, the culture, and the business as well.
I think one of the important things as well is to actually really kind of look into what role you applying for. So we have some roles that obviously you might apply for a similar role that you've done, but if you are looking a slightly different role and you've got transferable skills, just make sure that you actually know that role you are being interviewed for. For example, in resource management, we welcome applications from recruiters, operations and HR background. But sometimes when people come to an interview, although I try to give them lots of information before the interview, they still haven't kind of even to basically just go through the job description very thoroughly, so to understand that resource management is actually firstly not recruitment. So just to sort of like really make sure that you understand the role. You're not expected to know it in and out, but really understand what the sort of requirements are. And then another point is that quite a few companies like ourselves at EY, we still use competency-based interviewing, which is obviously is looking at assessing your experience and skills against different competencies. So then for those, you probably, at least on myself, when I sent the first interview invite, I let the candidates know what competency they're going to be assessed against. So it's like job motivation, teamwork. So then expect to have questions around that. And so for example, teamwork, you might have an example. Tell me about a time that you worked in a team that proved to be successful. So then to kind of approach that and to give you a little bit of an advice how to prepare for those sort of questions is that you can go on internet and look for more information, but your answer should be structured within just sort of like what we call a STAR method, so or STAR structure. So that STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So obviously you don't need to, but those and interviewers would obviously probe you. But if you know what's kind of like expected and you start thinking about, okay, about this successful team task you had. So what was the, you start going through that STAR and kind of like thinking about how you can answer. As a bonus point, sometimes because some of the questions are going to be positive. Tell me about a time that you worked in a great team environment or whatever, but you are probably going to be asked about, can you tell me about a time when you had to deal with, I don't know, a difficult stakeholder or something, a little bit finding out how you deal with challenges as well. So in particularly those cases or otherwise as well. So on top of that star sort of structure, it can sometimes good to be adding what we call an L, so learning. So what did you learn from that? So like if you're giving an example, for example, about something that which didn't go so well, if the interviewer is asking for that, at the end, just to sort of like reflect and kind of like what you took from that. And you can also tell them what you learned from that situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've had another question come in around kind of interviews. I think just leading on from Lottie's point around kind of competency-based interviews, one of the biggest things I think that kind of I always say to people that go into the interview process is, if you're given a question, a situational question, and you have to provide an example, it's really important that you practice it in advance, that you practice it out loud. They can come across as very wooden competency-based interview questions. It can feel very unnatural when you answer a question like that because you're trying to apply a specific answer format to it. So sometimes if you've just said it out loud to yourself once before, or in the mirror, or maybe practicing it with a friend or a partner or something like that, it just helps you. I kind of call it like self-editing. You can edit it before you actually get to the interview stage and go, that didn't sound right, it just sounded a bit wrong. Like feel free to reference names, companies, people. Like, it's important that it feels like a real life example, and that it's something that you can reflect on. But yeah, definitely competencies are something that's fairly standard for most companies. They've been around for a long time, so I do wonder what's coming next with them. But we've had a question in from Jonas, who said that a few of the questions he got in his last interview was what his negative points were, and I found that really tricky. I still would find that question very difficult. What are the things that you don't feel you're good at, or are there any, how strengths and weaknesses? What are your weaknesses? Does anyone have any tips on how to kind of tackle that question?
I've got a perfect technique for that one. That's something that I always used to prepare people for. So it is I think it's a horrible question, but anyway, we do still tend to see it. And what I've always sort of advised candidates is to pick a negative, and you can be honest. If there's, like, for instance, I am quite forgetful, so I'm just going to use my own example here. So I'm quite forgetful, but what I tend to do to overcome that is to ensure that I have got a booklet or notepad with all my to-do lists for the day. I make sure that when a task comes my way, I make a note of that, and I ensure that by the end of the day that I have completed all of those tasks before I finish my day off. So again, you are mentioning a weakness, so to say, that is not detrimental to the job, but you're also letting them know of how you're trying to overcome that. So you are making it into a positive. So you're showing, I am aware of this negativity that I've got, or not negativity, but this weakness that I've got, but I'm turning that into a strength. I'm actually making sure that I'm on top of my work at all times, and by doing that, I make sure that I overcome that weakness. So that is always my structure for that. And again, apply to yourself. Apply what you think is sort of a negativity or a weakness of yourself, and what are you doing to overcome that. So that is my advice on that.
It's a lot about self-awareness, isn't it? I think the question's more about self-awareness than it is about understanding what is your weakness. And I think that I've used that terminology. That's not the way the question was asked, but in terms of like what are your negative points? I mean, it's quite a difficult question to answer, but it's just more about awareness. And I think taking that, what they've seen about the learning, that's really important. Is I know that this is it, but this is what I do to counter it, or this is some feedback I've had, but actually this is what I'm doing to kind of work on it. And someone said, it comes up in career reviews as well, what areas are you not good on that you need to develop on? Well, that's something that, certainly I'm sure a lot of our EY alumni will be familiar with it, kind of cyclical leads, feedback cycles, and the sessions with counsellors. That's something that comes up a lot. I think, again, honesty is really important, but I think it's, you're aware of the areas you need to develop, but not being afraid to say, I still need support with this. Is there someone that can mentor me? Is there someone that can help me with this particular skill? Or can I do this course? Or I've done this course, or I'm being proactive. So there's lots of good kind of conversation tips that you can have in those situations.
And I think we also can't forget that being a perfectionist is not a weakness, unfortunately. So
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, do mention something that is a genuine thing, and again, you're being honest. So just to echo that as well, James. There's no point in saying, "Oh, I work too hard," or I'm a perfectionist. Use something genuine, because that's I do know that's an answer that they generally tend not to like.
Just another thing I thought to quickly add here is that obviously in terms of the interview questions, these might be more applicable maybe to sort of like more junior people or people who've been on career breaks. So not all your answers should always necessarily be linked to your sort of recent job, because for example, if you haven't had one, some interviews might then sort of probe that, okay, can you give me an example about you do not work? But for example, somebody who's more junior, for example, like you can talk about what you've done, your volunteer work or studies, or whatever you might have done outside of work. Like for example, I during my career break, I spoke about what I did as part of the parent association in school. So I gave an example about that, and it seemed to go perfectly fine. I wasn't asked to provide another example of actually sort of like paid work. So don't forget about those avenues as well. If you have done something great as a Girl Guides or whatever, so there might be some other examples that you can draw on as well.
Definitely, it kind of gives you an all-round picture of someone as well. I think that's really helpful. Okay, perfect. So I think we've got lots of questions coming in now, which is great. So Andrea's asked, how do we kind of stop meandering when answering questions? Is it typically better to make the interview more interactive and conversational? For example, asking a question at the end of your answer, their question, so someone asks a question, you answer it, and then you go, but how does that work at your organization? Or can you give me an example of how that works at this company? Is that something that you think interviewers appreciate rather than it being kind of more static, just a kind of back and forth? Or do you think it should follow a particular structure and then questions are reserved for the end?
I don't mind answering this one with what I think. So I think it can go two ways. You want to have an even balance here. You don't want to bombard the interviewer with questions. However, equally, you are here for an interview, and it's, just as much of a reason for you to ask questions and find out more about the role than it is for them to find out about you. So I would say if you're asked a question and you are genuinely interested, or there is a connection in asking a question back about whether something is working a certain way for this business, then you could go in and you could say, I am actually interested in understanding how it would work, or save it to ask at the end, because interviewers will always ask if you've got questions at the end of the interview process. And, they don't have to be, the standard types of questions that people would have. It could be anything related to anything about the role or the business. So yeah, I would say ask the questions, and it just shows that you are interested. I think it's a really positive indicator that you're invested in knowing, more about the role or the business, or, whatever it is that you're asking about. Be bold. Yeah, I would say go for it.
Definitely. I love a really interactive interview. I would hate to sit in an interview where it was just very formulaic, and I love it more when the interview conversation turns into more they're giving competency answers, but I haven't asked a competency question, so then it saves me having to ask competency questions. So I think that's really good as well. But I think when you come off a really good conversation where there's a good dynamic, actually you get off the call and you're like, oh, that was really good. Like, I really enjoyed speaking with that candidate. So for me, the more interactive, the better. But I think, yeah, it's obviously not for everyone.
And I think the danger of sort of like leaving the questions until the end, whether you remember. So if you don't want to ask us, you were talking about something, you might say, oh, well, if it's okay, I'd like to know a bit more about this, or can we talk about this at the end? Because, so it's fine to ask questions, I find. Gemma, you're on mute again.
Back on mute again.
Apologies. Happens all the time. That's very unfortunate. Okay, so this is one that come in advance, actually, and it's quite an interesting one, I think, given the current state of the kind of talent landscape. So we've got a lot of candidates who are being approached about role. So they're not actively looking. We're going to them on LinkedIn. We're talking to them about opportunities, and then they're getting to interview, and they're being asked the question, why is it that you want to join EY or another organisation? That's quite a difficult question to answer when you're a kind of proactively approached candidate. I don't know, Viv, do you maybe want to take this one? Because I'm guessing you probably do lots of headhunting.
Yeah, that's all I do, really. So again, it is when that question comes up, and in my opinion, it probably shouldn't come up, because the recruiter should probably be speaking to the hiring manager to let them know, listen, this is a candidate that we've headhunted. But if it does come up, and it is actually quite an easy answer to actually easy question to answer to, in my opinion. So basically, if you're a headhunted candidate, just be honest. Just say, I wasn't actively looking. However, once, for instance, I'm going to use myself as a recruiter, once Vivian approached me, I just realized that the relevance of the role was really sort of in line with where I would like my career to go. So even though not actively on the market at the moment, but for the right opportunities, I'm always open for an informal conversation. And the role stood out to me because of X, Y, and Z. Or once Vivian reached out to me, I actually did a bit of research on your team, and I really found your team really interested to hear more about your team, and want to know more of where you see your team grow in the next couple of years. So again, it's just be honest. You weren't actively looking, you're not actively on the market, and that is absolutely fine. But then just say why in the end of the day you are there. So don't just say I'm actually not actively on the market, and then just keep quiet. Do give an example, or do give a reason why you actually are on the call with them, or in a meeting with them on that day. So that's probably how I would answer those types of questions should they come up.
Perfect, that's great. And I think, I mean, certainly my understanding across kind of all levels of recruitment is that we are seeing, we've got lots of vacancies, we've got lots of jobs to fill, it's a very candidate short market. I mean, Lottie, Raz, from your perspective, I'm guessing we are also doing proactive work with people in kind of like our kind of manager, senior manager level roles or consultant roles. Is this something that you're seeing more of now, that we're seeing kind of passive candidates coming into process or even referred candidates? Is that something that you're kind of having to prep your managers for in the interview process?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. It's a really good channel for us to get candidates. It's not just about posting a CV online. Like those days are gone now. We are very much, out looking for candidates. We'll pop an advert up, but if you're going to have a LinkedIn profile, I'd say take ownership of that LinkedIn profile. And, when messages do come through, whether it's an interview or it's just a general message to say, are you interested? If you're not, definitely respond to the recruiters. And if you want to give a reason why you're not looking, fine, give it. Otherwise, be prepared to stay in touch. You just don't know when that opportunity may come up again, or you might want to work for that business again. So I'd always say, actively kind of review your LinkedIn profile. And yes, we are always building talent pipelines of candidates, and we are always reaching out to people outside of networks or outside the normal process of hiring. It's a big part of our role. So yeah, we are always on the lookout. It might not be for an immediate vacancy, but we do certainly pipeline as well. We always like to have conversations going before we have a vacancy, so that we can push candidates straight into process and get that moving as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
I think the process can be a little bit longer with headhunted candidates. So that's why, again, I'm just echoing your words, is that, sometimes if a recruiter contacts you, it's okay to say that I'm not interested, but maybe that sort of got you thinking a little bit and maybe connecting with them. So then they might post about a new job that has come up. So then you might be thinking, but yes, I find that sometimes the LinkedIn contacts, I might have been in touch with them sort of 6 months ago, and then suddenly they come back. So it's good to sort of have those, sort of keep those options open, and kind of put yourself out there a little bit.
Definitely. And just a note to kind of everyone on the call, we are planning on hosting a session on how to have kind of maximize your LinkedIn profile and how best to manage it, because I think that's something that we as recruiters, we spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, but actually, not everyone does. But it's always good to have a good profile, because you, as the panel have said, you never know when an opportunity is going to come up. So we're definitely planning on running a session specifically on LinkedIn profiling at a later date. Okay, so just in terms of kind of the kind of interview process, we covered off the kind of competency-based questions. Lottie, you obviously gave us some examples, and I was talking about how it's best to practice. What about Raz? Maybe this one's for you, in terms of how candidates talk about aligning, with the organisation. That's sometimes a question that's asked. What is it that attracts you to the company? Why would you maybe want to be part of it from a kind of values perspective? How would you recommend someone might tackle that question?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really important factor, and something that we often forget about. We read the job description, we know what we're applying for, we're interested in, the business as a whole, like from a cultural perspective. But actually, do you really understand what the key values are of this business? And I think it's extremely smart of you to come prepared, knowing what the key values are of the business. And if you don't know, or if they're not readily available online, then ask your recruiter, ask them those questions. You're more than entitled to have that conversation with your recruiter to understand a bit more about what our values are, and what we pride ourselves on as a business, and actually take those examples into the interview with you and try and tie in your answers around those values, because that will get you the extra brownie points as well, because it shows that you are adapting to our values, and obviously from a cultural perspective as well. So yes, investigate that, and come prepared, know what they are, and also be honest with yourself. Like, do our values align with yours? It really is a two-way street here. An interview is both for the interviewer and for the candidate. So if you read up on a business and you feel that your values are not aligned, then that's your opportunity to kind of rethink that. But if you are very much aligned with what the company values are, then showcase that in the interview, talk about how and why, give examples. I love hearing, these types of answers from candidates, and it really gives me a buzz, because it makes me feel even more excited about them joining the business, because I know they'll be an excellent addition to the business, and I know the hiring manager will be just jumping out of their seats as well, because they'll be like, yes, we want to hire this person. It's one thing that if you've got great skill set and experience, but what comes from within here, I think is equally just as fitting as well. Because again, you'll just be a great addition to the overall team and overall business, and that's extremely hard to find when reading off of a paper or a LinkedIn profile. So yeah, I'd say investigate the key values.
Fab. Thank you, Raz. That was a great answer. I agree. It's always when you speak to someone who just, you can sense that their energy and they're really interested in the opportunity and that there's an alignment there. It's really interesting. Okay, I think one of the questions that's come in advance was around how do you think people would feel, and I think it's different in this kind of virtual world, but if someone, for example, wanted to take notes in an interview, so where we're asking competency questions, and we've talked a lot about diversity and inclusion, obviously most organisations this is very high on the agenda. I know certainly that we're looking at inclusion from a neurodiversity perspective and things like that. If someone wanted to take a note in an interview or take notes and kind of refer back to them, how do you think that would be perceived? Dev, do you want to say that one?
Yeah, I'll take that, as I am, I've got neurodiversity myself. So as somebody with neurodiversity, sometimes it is just slightly more easier to be able to take notes. So I think there's nothing wrong of asking the question. Either speak to your recruiter ahead of time, say, listen, in order for me to do an interview well, I need to take a couple of notes. What I would just say, that when you do take notes, do try and interact with the interviewers as much as possible, because what we tend to do if we do have notes on us is sit like this and head down, and you're not actually interacting. So don't forget to interact. And I know that sometimes can be very hard, but in order for you to absorb all of the information and you have to take notes, absolutely. Or if you've got some questions whilst you're sort of chatting and you may be a little bit more nervous about maybe interrupt the conversation or saying, sorry, I've actually got a question about that, you can make a quick note of that. Absolutely. Just speak to your recruiter or before sort of your interview properly starts, to say, listen, can I just quickly ask a question before we start? Is it okay if I take notes because of X, Y, and Z reason? So it might be for you to be able to concentrate better, for you to be able to, for me, it really is for me. Again, I'm quite forgetful. Also with neurodiversity, I sometimes need a break. I sometimes just need to take myself and realign my thoughts again. And that sometimes helps by taking those notes. So, but again, I would just highlight, make sure that you carry on interacting with the interviewers, because that is just very important, because there's no point of you taking notes if your head is down the whole time and you're not actually getting the emotional connection with the interviewers.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that, Viv. Raz, sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to add, I think it's worth adding, remember to mention to your recruiter if you need any specific kind of adjustments made in the interview as well. It could be that, if you're doing a case study, for example, we often do ask candidates to do a case study. You might need a little bit longer if you've got dyslexia or, hearing or sight impairment, anything that you need an adjustment for, you are allowed to ask these questions. So please don't feel afraid to. It's very normal to ask these questions, and we can make adjustments for you where possible, whether it's in face to face in the office, or if we're doing it via Teams, we'll make it as comfortable and easy as we can for you in whichever way that supports.
Fully agree. I actually thought of another thing now as well, which is, for instance, for me, very, very important. So I know I'm using myself a lot as an example, but I sometimes can get quite overwhelmed if I get questions fired at me that I'm not expecting, and sometimes it's quite hard to sort of internalize that and be able to come back to the interviews in a proper way. I think over the years I've become a lot better at it, but I remember when I just started my career, I got really overwhelmed by it. So what I tended to do, and this is a thing that I still do on a day-to-day basis, if I get a question and I feel overwhelmed at that right moment and I'm not sure how to internalize that in order for me to respond quick enough or well enough, is to actually just say, is it okay if I come back to this question? Make a note of that question, just so you are aware you still have to come back to that, but can I come back to that question? And if they say no, I think that's kind of unreasonable. But if they do say no, then just say, the reason why I'm asking this is because I just need to internalize it for a second, and I'll be able to give you a much better and calculated answer in a second, and I will come back to it. And I think that is something that is really, really, I've only ever had once when somebody said, no, you can't come back to that question. And then I ended up still answering the question, but I ended up absolutely I messed it up really, really badly. And I actually ended up going back to the end of that anyway and say, I actually just want to make a note of this again. That question that you asked earlier, I was a little bit nervous at that second, so I didn't give you the best answer. Actually, how I would take it is do it like that. Try not to let it overwhelm you. Easier said than done, I know that, but try to just make a note of that and be able to internalize that so that you can give the best response possible.
Yeah, that's some really good advice. Thank you very much for sharing that. Another question that's come in from Lindsay said, like, what's the current landscape like for people looking for job share or part-time? I mean, I'm part-time. I work 4 days a week. Lottie, you're part-time as well. Are employers being more flexible to improve like work-life balance, people maybe with young children or who want to work but maybe can't do full-time hours? Certainly from my perspective, I think that's becoming more common. I can't speak to every employer, but certainly here, I think it's something that's very, very much kind of just a given. There's a lot of colleagues and partners and stakeholders that I work with that don't work full-time hours. I don't know if the rest of you would agree, if that's something that was fairly standard.
I think a 4-day working week is pretty standard. That's what I've been when I've been speaking to hiring managers. Oh yeah, 4-day working week. Yep, that's fine. Anything kind of more than that, it might depend a little bit on the role, and I'm sure there might be some roles that I haven't had any roles that we wouldn't be able to do 4-day working week. But I think sort of 4-day working week is pretty standard, and so many people are doing. I'm sure some roles are better suited for less than that, but 4-day working week wouldn't be. I don't. In my role, at least, wouldn't even need to be bigger for discussion. It would be, kind of like almost like given. But it's definitely getting, and this sort of flexibility, we hear about this all the time, and I have candidates come to me like, is that really true? Like, can you, I always think that for me personally, it was great about EY because I feel trusted to do my job. So then it's like I'm not micromanaged, nobody's checking when I'm actually online, because I suppose my workload is kind of big enough. So to do the job, I need to kind of do the hours, but it doesn't really matter when I do. Obviously, we have meetings, etc. And like in the beginning, I started to tell my boss, okay, I'm going to nip out. I need to pick up my daughter from school. And she's like, why are you telling me this? You manage your time. So obviously flexibility is really big. And also one interesting thing I find that when you go booking meetings and going to schedule view and whatever, looking at other people's schedules, quite high up, partners, everybody has pickup time. So school run, and there's like daughter swimming. So you see them. So it's out in the open. People block diaries, sports day, whatever. People kind of like, it's so out and open there. So, it's part of kind of who we are really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it can be quite difficult. I've got 2 young children myself. They're both preschoolers, so it's, they're little, they still need a lot. It was something I really struggled with when I was looking for an opportunity to be, can I ask that question? But I think you just have to be really upfront about it and say, listen, this is what I do. I'm good at it. I can do it in this amount of time, but I need the flexibility to be able to do that. And I think a lot of, even like doing 5 days a week, but working around school hours, and there's a lot of kind of opportunities to work flexibly now. And I think this kind of, the pandemic, if one thing has come out of it that has been slightly more positive, has been that this attitude towards more flexible working is definitely becoming more or less of a taboo.
That's so nice to hear, Jem, as well. I think that's what separates us from some of the other key players. I did my research, particularly when I joined this business, and obviously I've worked for other businesses as a contractor, and I can't say that all the businesses I've worked for have had that same kind of thing in place. It's not always been the case that you can just go for a dentist appointment as freely. You kind of do have to put it in the diary and let them know in advance. And look, we all know the situation when we're trying to book a doctor's appointment. You book it and you get it in like 2 months' time. So it's so lovely that EY have that culture where there's trust and you don't feel as though you're being micromanaged, and you have got the opportunity to be able to manage your own workload. And I think that's what sets us apart from everybody else, is that that's a given. It's, you know, almost I take it for granted now because I forget. But when we have this conversation, it reminds me that actually we do have a really great thing in place where, you know, as employees, we feel empowered to do our roles wherever we are, whenever we can. And you know, like you guys, like if you're doing 3 or 4 days, you can job share with somebody or pick up from where you've left off. You know, when it's your next time to come back in. I think that's really nice. It's really lovely to see that in practice.
Yeah, no, it's good, and I think, as I say, I think it's becoming much more common for most employers. Okay, I'm kind of conscious of time. We've got questions coming in that we're not going to be able to get to, but just in terms of, we'll do a kind of quick recap, and as I say, like, we will come back to you with all of the questions that we haven't got answered, and we'll send that out to you as a follow-up so that you do have the information. I guess just a kind of final point from everyone, like when it's, you know, if you're giving candidates one piece of advice when it comes to kind of like this class and what we've talked about today, you know, what would be your one key takeaway for people? Raz, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can. I would say it's very simple. Just have fun in the process. I mean, as I've said earlier on today, this is an opportunity for you to find out what is the right role for you, as it is for us to understand whether you're right for us. So just go on that journey and, you know, just have fun in that process. Obviously, put in your 110% in. You know, this could be your once in a lifetime opportunity to come in for an interview, or, you know, to work for this particular business. So I'd say focus on that, give it your all, but don't be disheartened at the end of it, because it is an experience altogether. Yeah.
Definitely, that's good advice. Viv, what about you?
Yeah, no, I completely echo that as well, Razan. I think we often forget that we're all human. So the people that that are interviewing us are also just human. Just be yourself. I know it's so nerve-wracking to do an interview, especially if you haven't done it in a while, and it doesn't matter what level you're at that stage. But you know, just be yourself. You are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. You know, it's an opportunity for you also to learn more about the business. Also, do I want to work for these managers? Do I want to be part of this team? Do I want to be part of this company? So really just try and enjoy the process and just be yourself and just really show, because that there will be people out there that want you for who you are and what you can bring to the business. So that's probably my word of advice.
What about you, Lottie?
I think the sort of like last but not least as well is that just remember that everybody gets rejected at times. So don't be disheartened that if for some reason don't get that job that you've really wanted. So almost like see rejection as redirection. So yeah, just go for it regardless.
That's great. Thank you, Lottie. Thank you so much, Viv, Lottie and Raz, for your time today. I really appreciate it. Just to recap, obviously the session has been recorded. We will get a recording out to you all. We will send up. Vaughan, I know we didn't get your question answered either. Andrea, I know you had another question. We will go back through all of the comments and questions and make sure that we come back to you as part of the follow-up. Please do keep an eye out for future sessions. So we are going to run a LinkedIn session in the future. And we also do offer interview preparation documents as standard here at EY. So what I'll do is, as part of the follow-up, I will share them with you, because although it's obviously EY specific and we can't say that every other company operates like that, definitely we'll probably have, you know, some tips that people might find helpful. So much for joining us. We really do appreciate it, especially over lunch. Hopefully you managed to get something to eat at the same time, and hopefully we'll see you on the next session. Thank you again to all the lovely panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
See you later. Have a good day.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.